Hey, YouTube folks, welcome to another video. After many requests, yes, guys, I finished watching the series, the famous series, The Queen's Gambit. I finished watching it yesterday, researched everything, all the games, and today I'm going to bring you the match, the big final match from the series. By the way, if you haven't watched The Queen's Gambit yet, be careful. Because in this video, we will have spoilers. Yes, there will be spoilers about some games from the series, about some events, especially about the final match. So basically, I really liked the series. I thought it was really cool. There's a lot of controversy, too, around the title of the series, which is The Queen's Gambit. And as we know, in chess here in Portuguese, the correct name for the piece is Dama. But in the series, they called it Queen. I can even understand the marketing move behind that because most people in Brazil don't play chess and know the piece as Dama. The piece Dama as Queen, so possibly even if the Netflix staff knew the game, they might have used the term Queen just to reach a bigger audience to make it more popular. Although those of us who are involved in the chess world know that the correct name is Dama, especially because of notation since you couldn't use Queen and King, both starting with the letter R, that would cause all sorts of confusion. So the name of the piece in Portuguese is Dama, but it's not a problem. They used Queen, probably for the sake of popularity. Other than that, the series is really good. I also saw a lot of direct connections between the story of the character, Elisabeth, who is the main character of the series, and the story of Fischer, right? So there's a lot of this duality between the two. So, of course, it's not exactly the exact chronology of Fischer's story, but a lot of things happen and are very similar to what happened with Bob Fischer, right? The matter of being a prodigy girl and Bob Fischer also being a prodigy child, she became the North American champion very early. Fischer did too. And all this rise, later fighting against the supremacy of Russian chess, right? Practically alone, and Bob Fischer too. So there was all this, and there's always that dramatic part about the genius of the player, and the genius bordering on madness that happens in the series, and in a way, also in Bob Fischer's life. There was a lot of this issue of genius bordering on madness, the eccentricity that this player had, so I saw a lot of connection between that. And here we're going to see then. So today, the big match, the grand final of the event in which Elisabeth participates there against Russian supremacy, which was represented here by the character Vasily Borgov, who was the Russian super grandmaster who is part of the story there. And we're going to see the grand final of this match, so let's get to it now. So everyone, here we are. And before we start watching the grand final match between Elisabeth Harman and Vasily Borgov, let's take a look at the first two games that Elisabeth ever played in her life. Yes, how did that happen? So Elisabeth, she was living in an orphanage, right? After some events in her life, she ended up in an orphanage, and in that orphanage, there was a janitor who studied and played chess in the basement. One day, Elisabeth was there cleaning the teacher's erasers, and she saw the janitor playing. The first thing is that she looks at the board briefly, gets very curious about those pieces, about that game, and she becomes really interested in it. And what's most amazing is that apparently, from what happens in the series, she learned how to play, how to move the pieces, just by watching that brief moment when the janitor was playing there. One day, she visited the janitor, wanting to play a game with him. The janitor was a bit hesitant about it. This kid there, he didn't really want to teach her, But he ended up giving in, and they played a game. And Elisabeth's first game ever happened like this. The janitor, playing white, started with e4, and Elisabeth responded with e5. Elisabeth, just a little kid. Learning there, after e5, the janitor played bishop to c4, and we can already see where this is going. Right? After knight to c6, the janitor played queen to f3, and Elisabeth played knight to d4 in this position. And yes, she got hit with the scholar's mate. That was the first checkmate she ever got in her life, right? The first lesson the janitor gave her was about the scholar's mate, which, even though it's not a very good opening in practice, he ended up using it on her here, so she was really upset about it. She wanted to know how this scholar's mate worked and all, but the janitor said, "No, that's it for today. That's your lesson for today." The next day, Elisabeth came back to play with the janitor, and she was already prepared against the scholar's mate. She kept reflecting on the scholar's mate and found some solutions. So, in the second game, she played with the janitor played white again, and Elisabeth played here with e6, a little French defense. So I have her notation here. The janitor continued playing in this position with d4. The queen's pawn, Elisabeth played g6, and after knight to f3 comes the move queen to f6, followed by bishop to c4, and then bishop to g7. And in this position, the janitor pulls off a little trick with bishop to g5, trapping Elisabeth's queen, right? So she sacrifices the queen for the bishop because the queen is absolutely trapped. After the knight took on g5, Elisabeth wanted to continue, but the janitor instructed her to resign. And she said, "But how do I resign? I want to keep playing." The janitor said this was a lesson and that resignation was necessary due to a serious mistake involving the loss of a valuable piece. So he was trying to teach her about the value of the pieces. Right. And about the fact that when you lose a very valuable piece, your opponent can use a very simple technique here and he will win the game. So that was Elisabeth's second game in her life. And after that, she kept studying, right? She started to surpass the janitor, started to win some games against him, and soon after, he began to realize that she was really a chess prodigy. Then she starts playing in the city championship, then wins the state championship, then wins the national championship, and that's how she begins her career until she reaches the Russian supremacy with the character Vasily Borgov, which is exactly the match we're going to see now in the grand finale of the series. So let's see how this match went. In this final match, we had Elisabeth Harmon playing white against Vasily Borgov, and according to the research that was done, I checked on HD Mater and some internet channels, this grand final match was actually created by Kasparov. He staged this match and sent it to Netflix, so they made an agreement. And Kasparov created this match here. So let's see what kind of game this was, ladies and gentlemen. So the game started here with Elisabeth playing d4, which is already the first surprise, right? Because throughout the whole series, she was an e4 player, king's pawn. But in the game against Vasily Borgov, she started with the queen's pawn. The game continued here with d5 and after c4, which I think is where all the mystique is, right? The series ended up creating what it set out to, given its title, The Queen's Gambit. On this occasion, in the grand final, they're playing a Queen's Gambit here. This is a Queen's Gambit. It was a Queen's Gambit accepted. With the pawn captured on c4, Elisabeth played e4, and the game continued with knight to knight 6. And bishop to e3, defending the pawn on d4. Knight to f6 was played, knight to c3. So e5 followed by d5. Push the knight goes back to e7. Bishop takes on c4, recovering the pawn. And the game continues here with knight g6 f3, followed by the move bishop d6 queen to d2 bishop d7, developing the pieces, knight from g to e2, and at this moment, a6 is played here by Borgov. Well, it's a game that's very balanced. There's no disadvantage for either side. At this moment, Elisabeth continues playing here with bishop to b3, and after b5 comes the move a4, creating a bit more contact on the queen's side. So Borgov at this moment, both players are preparing short castling here. They castle queen to e7. It was played rook from a to c1, and at this moment, knight to c5. Black starts mobilizing the pieces on the king's side. And Elisabeth, she was very tense in this game. She had already played 2 games against Borgov before. I won't give the result of those games. I've already given some spoilers here from the series, but nothing too serious. But I won't give the result of those other 2 games that Elisabeth played with Borgov. But in this game here, she was very tense, really tense. After knight to 5, she played pawn to g3, protecting the d4 square. Borgov played h6 here. Bishop to d2, then rook from a to b8, pressuring the b file. The b file might open, activating the rook. Elisabeth takes the b5 pawn. The game continues with pawn takes pawn and Ray 1. The a file is now open and Elisabeth brings her rook there immediately. The game continues with Ra8 as Borgov doesn't allow Elisabeth full control of the file. bd3 was played, then bb4 pinning the c3 knight. The game continued with rook exchanges, rxa8, and then queen to c2 was played here by Elisabeth, freeing the knight completely from the pin. And now there's strong pressure on the b5 pawn. At this moment, Borkov played an interesting move here. Bishop to c5, taking advantage of the fact that the bishop on d3 is unprotected. Elisabeth defended the bishop with n1. bd6 was played. By black, then knight to f2 maneuvering, and at this moment, black plays a very interesting move. Here, a more aggressive move, a move that seeks some imbalance, which was the move knight from h to f4. Yes, Borkov is allowing the knight to be captured. Elisabeth didn't capture the knight, creating a tense line. If she captures, the idea is that if she takes there, that knight, pawn takes knight, pawn takes pawn, bishop to e1, and black's idea is to attack here. Moving the knight to h4 pressures, f3, and the queen moving to g5 threatens checkmate on g2. However, Elisabeth avoided this line. She played rook to c1, bringing it to the c file. It's well defended for now, but there might be some ideas coming. To play here with bishop to c5. The game continued with queen to g5, maintaining the pin on the g3 pawn. Taking the knight is not possible due to the pin. Another threat arises. Playing knight takes e2 check, which would result in the loss of the bishop on e3, a serious problem for white. What did Elisabeth do next? She got out of those threats, played here with king to 8-1, got out of the check threat. Now you can't take because otherwise you're losing the queen. So the move was queen to h5. The queen is now eyeing the f3 pawn, and again, you can't take the knight. It would be very dangerous to take this knight here because black would have a very strong line. Queen to f3 check, and after king to h1 knight to h4 would come, with almost unstoppable mate ideas here. You would have to keep running with the king, right? Queen to g2 king, to e1 knight, to f3. Notice that the king is trapped, right? He can't escape this way. King to d1, and here there would be checkmate with queen to f1. So be careful, you can't take Borkov's knight there yet. Borkov is paying attention to everything here. He attacked the f3 square now, created a threat, right? Elisabeth in this position played knight to g1, defending the pawn on f3. So the bishop was captured here on d3. Knight takes d3, then f5 was played, the first points of contact. Here on the king's side, the pawns start trying to open lines. The game continues with knight to c5 attacking the bishop. The bishop moves to c8. The game goes on with rook f1, bringing more support here to defend the f3 point. At this moment, knight to e7 Borkov starts maneuvering his pieces again. The game continues with queen d3 and the capture of the e4 pawn. F takes e4 and queen to g6. At this moment, Elisabeth starts to improve her king's position a bit, controlling some important squares here with king to g2. The game continues with king to h7, knight to f3, and knight to g8. He's trying to bring the knight here to the f6 square, looking for activity for black. The game now continues with knight to h4 attacking the queen. Queen to g4 was played, then knight to f5. This is an important maneuver in the game. The position is tense, it's a balanced position, maybe even a slight advantage for black at this moment, but this is a maneuver that starts to bother to disturb black's position because the knight is on an advanced outpost. Black in this position played knight to f6, then h3 was played by Elisabeth. And this is an important moment because at this point, Borkov makes a face showing he doesn't really like what's happening, and he asks to adjourn the game. So this adjournment of the game was something that existed some time ago, which is called sealing the move. How does that work? Your opponent, after the game has gone on for a long time and is very exhausting, has the right to request an adjournment of the game to the next day. And how does that work? The referee comes and you seal the move. What do? You take an envelope and write down what your move will be. The referee keeps that envelope and the match is postponed. The next day, the match resumes. The referee opens the envelope, sees what move you wrote down, and the match continues from there. Borkov wrote down his move, sealed it in the envelope, and the next day, the referee saw it was queen to g6. One important thing here in the movie's plot, right, is that it makes very clear something that really happened in real life, right? The Russian school of chess, the Russians, they relied a lot on analysis in these adjourned games. They had a lot of support from other super grandmasters to try to find the main lines. since there were no engines at that time. The grandmasters would get together and start breaking down the position completely to understand what to do in that position the next day. And Elisabeth, in this situation, she didn't have much support. However, she did have a group of grandmasters in the United States who did this for her. So they called her and said, Elisabeth, in this position, do this, do that. Against his move, you go into this line. And they started analyzing the position and passed that information to her. So it ended up showing that in this part of the movie, the Americans also managed to come together to try to support Elisabeth to help her win this game against the Russian. While that was something natural in Russia, right? And that also happened in the matches between Bob Fischer and Spassky. That happened too. But Bob Fischer, at the time, he was really more on his own. He managed by himself, while the Russians were able to have all that support behind the Russian grandmaster, right? Whoever was playing or competing in the events. So after Queen G6, Elisabeth continued playing here with the move Knight E6, which is the first move that really starts to create an imbalance in the position. It's a move that bothers, right? The black position. Now there's a threat to take the G7 pawn. There's also a threat to capture the bishop on D6 and play Knight F8 here, giving this fork, which would be terrible for Borgov's position, right? So the game continued here with Rook to E4, which is a strong move, okay? Which now threatens to take the pawn on E4. Elisabeth played bishop to B3, attacking the rook. The main point is taking the bishop on D6 directly here. Black will first take the knight here, so there's no option for the double capture, right? If you take on D6, you lose the knight on F8 in the game. So you can take here on E6 first. But that's not what Elisabeth did. She saw this line and played here with B3. So then it continued with rook takes E4 winning a pawn, but the rook is a bit out of play here. The game continues with knight takes D6 threatening Elisabeth's move of knight to F8. So bishop takes E6 pawn takes, and notice that this passed pawn could be a problem here for black's position. And now the real drama in the game begins, because at this moment, Elisabeth continues with E7 and Borgov plays a move that technically the Americans who prepared the main lines for Elisabeth, who gave her the variations, no one had predicted, which was the move queen to C5. She's very surprised by this move. And then at that moment, she starts looking for the lines. She looks up at the ceiling, which was a characteristic she had of seeing a chessboard on the ceiling like that, and then everyone in the hall starts looking at the ceiling, and they look at what's there. But it was just her thinking. The moves, right? So after D5, Elisabeth finds the strongest lines here. And she plays the strongest move in the position, bishop to 5, holding the advanced pawn here. The game then continues with queen D8, queen 8, and at this point, Borgov is already starting to get scared. His expression already shows he's starting to worry as the position gets worse. After queen E8, Elisabeth continues here with queen F3, a very strong move, okay? That activates the queen, potentially preparing for some queen F5 moves. Borgov here plays queen C6, attacking the bishop. And now comes a bomb, a move that is very strong in this position, simply holding the bishop. B4 was played. Now the bishop is in an advanced position, holding the pawn, and there could even be some queen sacrifice themes at some point. Here you have to be careful with the pawn promotion. So Borgovine at this moment brings the queen back to D8, and extra, this is the perfect moment. The moment when the Russian offers a draw to Elisabeth. So he offers her a draw here, and she says, no. She wanted to win. She wanted to win at all costs. It was her life's mission to defeat Russian supremacy. She refuses the draw in this position and continues playing with queen F5 here. Borgov was shocked when she refused the draw, as he didn't expect it from someone challenging a world chess legend like himself. And after the move king H8, she plays a bomb on the board here. Yes! She goes for a queen sacrifice. She plays here with queen takes F6 pawn, takes F6. And after rook takes F6, the threat is very direct to play rook to F8, and here white already has a big advantage in this position. Borgov, visibly frightened with wide eyes fixed on the board, continues playing queen to H5, seeking counterattack opportunities. The rook may join, potentially capturing pieces, So caution is necessary as mistakes can always happen. But Elisabeth, who was very focused, played here with rook to f8, and after that move, king moves to g7, promoting to a queen. Be cautious. The Russian is still going to try to resist. He's going to activate his rook. So he plays with rook e2 here, and after the move king f1, he's keeping an eye on the rook. If he takes here, the rook falls, and that's what happened. Queen takes h3. The Russian is going to try to find a drawing line, a perpetual check line here. But Elisabeth in this position takes the rook on e2, and after queen to g2, rook to f2 comes back to cover here. The check comes, then queen to e4, and this is the tense moment of the endgame, where Elisabeth remains completely calm. With all the calm in the world, she plays king to d2. And in this position, the Russian resigned. Extra. The Russian resigned here. It was a really sensational moment in the movie. Of the series, because there's no way for black to continue here since you don't have any more checks up your sleeve. And white has several mating lines in sequence. The rook can swing over. Queen checks from every side. The king is very exposed. And since black has no more checks, the game is over. And Elisabeth wins then. About Russian supremacy, it was a really cool series and a great match. I was very entertained watching this series. I watched it in 2 days. There were 7 episodes of about an hour each. But I really liked how everything was portrayed. Of course, we can notice that there are some imperfections there. We can see that there's a lot of drama too in relation to some parts of the tournaments. In a way that doesn't happen in real life, but of course we understand that it's a series and you have to create a story around everything. But I really like the series. It's a series I highly recommend. If you haven't seen this series yet, go watch it, because you won't regret it, okay? The whole atmosphere and the vibe created around chess is really cool, okay? I hope you enjoyed this brief summary, right? Some opinions as well about the series and the big final match between Elisabeth and Vasily Borgov. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a big like down below. And see you in the next videos, guys. Thanks. Subtitles by Adriana Zanotto.